This is a Schumacher CAT 2000 EC. This is my second Schumacher CAT. The first one I made a video of, and I actually have it right here. So actually I'll go over this one briefly. So this CAT that I got before is neither an EC or a CAT 2000. It has a bit of a mishmash of various components. It has the laydown front suspension of the 2000 EC, like this guy. But on the EC, the rear also had laydown shocks. But on this, we got stand-up shocks in the rear, much like the original 2000 from 1993. So it had me a little confused on this chassis as to whether it's fundamentally a 2000 or 2000 EC. The only difference that I can tell by studying the manuals for both are the front and rear shock towers and the rear hub carriers. The rear hub carrier on the 2000 had this little insert on the part of the hub carrier where the hinge pin mounts through to the suspension arm, and there were you could sort of flip that insert over, I think, so that you could basically change the height of the rear hub carrier. On the 2000 EC, it's just a normal sort of fixed rear hub carrier, just like any standard hub carrier. So based on the fact that this has the 2000 rear hub carrier and the 2000 rear shock towers, I am inclined to say that this is actually a 2000, and the previous owner just put an EC front suspension geometry on there, and that was it. Although it does have an EC upper deck, but this is a carbon fiber upper deck, and the original 2000 and 2000 EC came with I think fiberglass or non-carbon fiber upper and lower decks. So I think this started out as a 2000, I'm pretty sure. But I do plan on turning it into an EC, which means putting lay down rear shocks down and getting the appropriate upper and lower decks. This lower deck is actually from the CAT 98, and the previous owner, I think they did that because on the CAT 98 the saddle packs mounted here and here, and so he just put a little plate down so he could put a stick pack here. On a 2000 and a 2000 EC, the saddle packs mounted on either side of the chassis. So in time this will be a true EC, with the exception of the rear hub carriers. But I have the components to turn this into either a 2000 or a 2000 EC. So I just want to clarify on this guy. It's a bit of a mess right now. I have most of the parts I need to convert this to the right chassis, and this will happen in time. But in the meantime, I have a proper 2000 EC here. Got this off of eBay recently. It just showed up in the mail. And this also came with a whole bunch of spare parts. I have to sort through these and see what's going on. Set of wheels, some diff pulleys, some gear case stuff in here, plenty of suspension arms, all kinds of stuff. So I just got to sort through it all and see what's what. One thing that's interesting about the Schumacher CAT is that it uses 14mm hexes on the wheels. So it's a bit of a pain because some vintage buggies, like the Kyosho Laser and the older Tamiyas, they all use 12mm hex rims. And modern Team Losi and modern Kyosho and even modern Associated now use 12mm hex rims. These use 14mm. So the rims are not interchangeable. If you want to run this chassis at a vintage race, you either have to get the 12mm hex conversion, which Schumacher does make, and you can buy 12mm hexes to put on here, or if you want to run the original rims, you got to get a whole new set of tires for those. But anyway, enough ranting about that. The paint scheme on this body from the previous owner is very, very nice. This is so nice, I don't even plan on getting my own body and doing my own paint scheme. Because if you look over here, I tend to do this sort of black into blue with flames paint scheme. There's my Avanti, there's all my racing chassis. I tend to do that. And I think I'll just leave this the way it is for now. It looks really cool. I like it a lot. So I see no reason to spend money on yet another body and do another paint scheme. So very nice. I may add a few decals, but otherwise I'm going to leave it that way. This chassis has a few aftermarket components here. A lot of nice like purple nuts here all around the chassis. On the rear, the hinge pin mount on the rear part of the suspension arms. Also on the front, kind of hard to see, but right there. I don't know if it's aluminum or steel. Might be steel, but some kind of metal. The stock component was like a fiberglass component. Carbon fiber upper and lower decks, carbon fiber front and rear shock towers, carbon fiber rake plate here. So one thing that was interesting about the CAT 2000 is that it had what was called Rake Adjustment, which I've never seen on any other chassis ever. And what rake is it's different from caster. So rake is the difference between the front and rear ride height when the car is at rest. Okay, so if you think about what's happening, if the rear is, say, lower than the front, then the hub carriers are at the front steering knuckles are at some angle with respect to the ground. Okay, so if you just change the relative front and rear ride heights, what you're really doing is changing the caster at rest. And so by understanding what this is doing, I realized that caster is really a dynamic setting, right? You might get, say, a 30-degree caster block on your two-wheel drive buggy, but that's really 30 degrees caster at rest, okay? And then as the car is diving under braking or squatting under acceleration, that caster angle is changing. So what you can do with this is change the rake angle, which basically pushes the front up or down, but without affecting the suspension geometry, without affecting your spring preload or anything like that. So you can get the steering response that you want. So I thought that's pretty cool. It's cool. It's academically interesting, but for a modern four-wheel drive buggy, you don't actually need it. I mean, you can take a B44.2 and make it work really well, and it does not have a rake plate. But it's still kind of neat from an engineering perspective. Let's see what else is on here. This has the full set of heat sinks here. So when Schumacher made the CAT 2000, the motor mount is, I think, like a nylon or a plastic component, and then there's a slot in the upper deck here that this heatsink plate slots into, and then the motor mounts against that to dissipate heat, and you can get, any number of heatsink fins here to mount to this plate. So, for example, if we go back to this CAT 2000, it has a heatsink plate and 2 heatsinks, okay? And then if we come back over here, this has all 6 heat sinks, or 5. You can't put 6 in because the 6th one would interfere with the spur gear here. So it's pretty much fully loaded. It has the original rubber battery, I don't know what this is called, but basically a battery holder. So it's like a clip, and you just clip it right in, and it holds the batteries in place. Now this, of course, is for NiCads or nickel metal hydrides. You'd have to get a lipo tray or something to put in here to really hold lipos down. And this chassis, it appears the previous owner kind of shaved out the NiCad holes to make them nice and smooth to fit the batteries in it. Irrelevant for modern lipos, but it's a nice little touch there. Comes with a Novak Atom DC speed control. Everyone runs brushless now, so this is irrelevant. But for its time, the Atom was a very nice speed control. So I kind of got this for free, and DC motor here. So maybe I'll put this in one of my older Tamiyas that I still run DC motors on. Very nice speed control. I think it was one of the first programmable speed controls. This and the Novak Cyclone. Let's see here. What else do I want to point out? I don't know. Oops. Very pretty chassis. I'm really happy with it. I'll have to take it apart, clean up a few things. It's got a little bit of dust here and there. Rebuild the diffs. Front and rear diffs aren't exactly perfect. Stands to reason because this is an old chassis. and it has been run. Maybe change the suspension. These springs are quite stiff, so I would expect that the previous owner, having lived in Europe, probably ran on some kind of high traction surface, and so ran a stiffer setup here. So I got to put softer springs on, softer oil, and set this up for an American track. But this is the other CAT 2000. Very pretty, very nice. And maybe I'll use this for vintage racing. I don't know. I have too many four-wheel drive chassis at this point. But I just want to show this off. And thanks for watching.